Thanks, Christine. I'm not telling you about my trip, though, because I gave the Mediocre group a choice between the trip and hiking the AT, and they picked the AT. Christine was... next time. Or you can just Q&A about the trip. So I'm going to talk about hiking the AT in Georgia. Like Christine said, I'm an assistant professor, so my day job is like really academic and boring, and I'd much rather spend time being in nature and telling other people about how to get out in nature, because it's a lot more accessible than you might think. So I'm going to talk about hiking the AT in Georgia the easy way, meaning you don't need a tent, you don't need boots. I hiked the whole thing. I did use a tent once or twice, but I did not own hiking boots. One of the things that's increasingly untrue is that there's no cell phone service in the mountains. So back when I hiked the AT in Georgia, we had AT&T. Like the joke is like you don't get AT&T service anywhere, but especially not in the mountains. I was out there last weekend, and I had service almost my whole hike. So this is starting to change, but you want to make sure you know what you're doing, so you don't need your phone, right? You don't want to be like planning on getting walking directions on your phone and then realize like you have no idea where the hell you're going. Okay, so, oh yeah, you. I got to point at you. Can you see my magic thingy? My remote is fake. So... okay, so what is the Appalachian Trail? So it's a long-distance hiking trail. It was the first one that was made in the United States. There's now many of these that range in distance. There's 3 that are really big. So the AT is almost 2,200 miles long. I'm kind of a goals person, so I basically wanted to hike the AT as soon as I heard it existed and had a distance. I was like, yep, cool, I want to do that. So I started hiking because I wanted to try to do the whole thing. We'll see if that happens. My poor husband, who's here, has been suckered into many things, attending tonight, as well as hiking about 1,200 miles of the trail with me. So we've done from Georgia, which is actually where it starts, up to the middle of a cornfield in Pennsylvania is how much of the trail we've hiked, and it extends another 1,000 miles or so into Maine. The trail runs from peak to peak, so it runs from the top of Springer Mountain to the top of Mount Katahdin, which is in Maine, and it goes through 14 states: Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. I think that's all of them. And so the longest section is Virginia, 540 miles go through that state. So that's kind of like daunting, right? If you're like, hey, I'm gonna hike a whole state, 540 miles is a long freaking way to walk. It took us like 4 or 5 years to finish that. But there's only about 70 miles that go through Georgia. And I know that that sounds incredibly crazy that I would use the phrase only and 70 miles in the same sentence, but it's actually pretty accessible in terms of how many road crossings and how many parking spaces there are, so you can really break it down into like easy sections. Okay, so this is me and my husband and our friends. The first day we hiked on the Appalachian Trail. So our friends are, it's really, these pictures are like a decade old almost, so they're pretty lame. We negotiated with our friends, standing around our kitchen a little under 10 years ago, about grand adventures that we would have. So they suggested hiking the Benton-McKay Trail. It's this pretty remote trail in Georgia, and paddling the Altamaha River. Y'all ever heard of that? It's 140 miles. It flows, the Oconees flow into it, and it flows into Brunswick, Georgia. So they wanted to paddle this river, and they wanted to hike this trail, and we were like, okay, we'll do the river, but Michelle, she's crazy, she wants to do the AT, so can we do that instead of Benton-McKay? So we started off together. I'm a little intense, if you can't tell, from my rate of speech, and so they hung with us for a good about 35 miles or so, and then we took off and did some more of it on our own, and they picked up with us in Georgia and North Carolina as they could. But what I want to point out is that the AT is for everyone. So a decade ago, I had not hiked 1,200 miles. I had not hiked anything more than like a day hike in a state park when I happened to be in the area, or like some trails along the Blue Ridge Parkway. We're not like super skinny, fit people that it's like, oh yeah, sure, I can go hike 9 miles today without training. Like we were just regular people who exercised some, didn't exercise a lot, and just figured we'd take our time and see what we could do. Since then, we've seen people of all ages hiking the trail. So one time, an 85-year-old ran past us like we were the slowest people in the world. My husband and I were like, great, that's really great. This 85-year-old man just put us to shame, and he had a full pack on because he was through hiking, which means hiking the whole thing at one time. A couple years later, we were hiking in Virginia, and we came across this mom and 2 kids, and she had this giant pack, and I was like, oh, like, look how awesome it is that this mom is, like, taking her kids for a day hike. And, like, wow, she had to pack a lot of stuff for her day hike because she's got 2 kids. And so we're sitting there and, like, chatting with these kids on a snack break, and one of the kids goes, oh, yeah, we walked here from Georgia. We were in Virginia, and the kid was 5. So this mom and her 2 twins that were 4 years old actually hiked 1,200 miles one year, and they came back out and hiked another 1,200 miles the next year, or like about 1,100 each year. They hiked the whole thing. The mom had some help when they started from some older kids, but for most of the time, she was on the trail alone with her kids, Strongman and Strawberry Shortcake. If you're a hiker, you get trail names, and those were the names that the kids had. A lot of moms get called Mama Bear. It's like a really common trail name for women. Last year, a couple thru-hiked, meaning all in one go, the Appalachian Trail with an 8-month-old. So the dad quit his job so that he could spend time with the daughter, and they hiked from Virginia down to Georgia, and then from Maine down to Virginia. So their daughter learned to walk hiking on the Appalachian Trail, which is like totally wild. There's photos of like blowouts and all kinds of crazy things that they had to deal with on the trail. I'm not that brave, but people are. So, you know, if you might think you are, other people have done it. You won't be the first crazy person who's done this. People who are blind have hiked the trail. People who are paraplegic have hiked the trail. Basically, you can probably do it. You might do it slow, but you can probably do it. Okay, that was probably my longest little pitch. Okay, so you don't need a tent, but you do need to survive. So some like basic things you want to consider bringing with you if you're going to go hike. Bring some food that you'll eat. So like, you know, like pack a lunch and some snacks. Typically a good idea to pack a little bit more food than you think you'll actually eat, just in case you do get injured and spend a little bit more time out on the trail than you intend. You want to carry some water. On the AT, there's a lot of water sources, and these are actually all marked really well on the trail and on maps. But even in the mountains, the water is not really of good drinking quality. So if you're in the mountains, you still have to filter your water. Like if animals or other hikers have contaminated the water, you don't want to drink their stuff. So there's really lightweight filters that can clean that out for you. We've pumped water out of a mud pit before, and it was like surprisingly good. So the filters are pretty effective. Maybe that's what we should use instead of Britas, as our little filters. But for a day hike, you can usually pack enough water for yourself. I bring about one of these for every 8 miles for myself. So just to give you a sense, I'm a pretty light drinker, though. You should probably hydrate better than me. You want to pack some kind of warm clothing. So even if it's the summer, it's going to be cooler in the mountains. So whatever the relative temperature is, pack something to keep you warm in case, like I said, nighttime comes or it's cooler than you expected. And what's the other thing I said you need? Oh yeah, you need a map. Because cell phones don't work out there, you can get a map for like $10. So you can hike the whole Appalachian Trail in Georgia for like a map and gas money to get up there. Okay, I want to talk about shoes because you don't need boots, but you do need shoes that aren't going to give you blisters. So make sure you're wearing something that feels kind of secure, like tennis shoes are fine. I hiked the whole AT in Georgia all the way actually into the Smokies. I hiked the first like 250 miles just in tennis shoes. Now I wear trail runners. That's just my preference. I like to wear lightweight shoes. And they're Gore-Tex, they're like waterproof, so I can walk in stuff without getting my feet quite as wet, except if you get caught in the rain, then it doesn't let the water out very well either, so pros and cons, but that's my preference. A lot of people like hiking boots, and if you like hiking boots, then do that, do you, but make sure they're broken in before you hike, because it can take like hundreds of miles to break in some pairs of hiking boots. Okay, so how do we do this crazy thing? You can do this with either one car or 2 cars. So when we hiked with our friends, we did this with 2 cars. We would drive 2 cars out, and we would park one car, so both cars would drive to the end of the hike. We would leave one car there, and we'd all get in the other car and drive to the beginning of the hike, and then we'd all walk together to our car at the end, and then go pick up our other car. It's kind of a pain in the ass, but it's also kind of awesome to like hike 10 miles and to feel like you're going somewhere instead of like hiking somewhere and then turning around and hiking back. So that's one good way that you can do it. There's at least one person in this audience who is doing it with the one car way, where you just park your car somewhere and then you hike out to wherever you're going to hike to, and then you turn around and you walk back to your car. The bonus of that method is you get to hike the trail both northbound and southbound. So you can be like Nobo and Sobo. This is AT terminology at the same time. There is a guy a couple years ago who hiked the entire Appalachian Trail in 1 year, both Nobo and Sobo. So he hiked the trail both directions by himself, out and back. And he also took a picture of every single shelter, which I'll tell you about shelters eventually. Another option, and this is like really pretty crazy, is to drive to the end of a hike and meet a stranger there. Leave your car there, get in the stranger's car, and they will drive you to the beginning. And the first time we ever did this, we were actually driven by a crazy person. He was pretty crazy, but there are a lot less crazy people out there. And so pretty much every other time we've done this has been a little bit more secure. It's a little strange. You don't have cell phone service. You're kind of just sitting in this gravel parking lot like, hey, I emailed this person. Are they going to show up or not? Well, they do want your money, so they are typically going to show up. And the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, which coordinates the maintenance of the trail, actually has a list of people that are known to do this, and you can usually get like tips and advice from other people about like who's reliable or stuff like that. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet, because I like spreadsheets because my day job is data, about all of the parking spots in Georgia. And so I'm gonna give you my contact info at the end. If you'd like to see any of this stuff, I'll give it to you. Springer Mountain, that's where the AT begins. And the first closest parking lot to that is actually 0.9 miles away from that. So you have to hike up a mile just to get to the beginning of the trail. But then these are all the other accessible parking lots. And what I'd just like you to notice is that with the exception of one, they're under 10 miles. They're single digits. An average hiking pace for somebody who's pretty in shape and pretty seasoned would be like 2 to 2.5 miles an hour. And if you're really slow, like really, really slow, you can probably still do a mile an hour, including breaks. Like if it takes you 40 minutes to walk a mile and you sit down for 20 minutes and then you do the whole thing over again, you're looking at a mile an hour. That's a painfully slow pace. So it's unlikely you're actually that slow, even if you think you are. So you can actually use these mileage estimates to think through, like, is this attainable for me? If I'm willing to just take all day and go at my own pace and go slowly, maybe I could actually do this. Because you can hike like 9 miles in like 5 hours. I know that sounds crazy if you've never hiked before, but you start to get used to it. So the longest day you'd ever have if you were day hiking in Georgia is the one that's like 13.5 or 13.6. And that is actually a pretty long section. Like that's longer than a half marathon, just to put that in perspective. So I'm not like sitting up here like, hey, this is actually easy. It's just that it is actually attainable if you work your way up to that distance. So even 13.6 miles, if you've gotten to like 2 mile an hour pace, which is really comfortable, would take you less than a work day to do. You might be miserable, although I think you'd be surprised at how unmiserable being miserable on the trail can be. It's just so different than your everyday life. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Leave No Trace. So Leave No Trace is called LNT for short. It's just basically don't throw your trash in the woods. So if you bring food with you, make sure you pack your wrappers out. If you bring water bottles, make sure you pack them out. One of the big things that we have a problem with on the AT, because it's really popular, so you're not gonna have a lot of solitary experiences on the AT, which is good if you're scared of being alone, but bad if you're looking to be alone. Anyway, one of the biggest problems we have is actually toilet paper. And it's particularly prominent for women who are like, oh, my toilet paper doesn't count as trash, but it does. So if you don't know how to pee in the woods, you might want to learn how to do that. For a day trip, you can usually manage to avoid shitting in the woods. Some people have like digestive things though where they go frequently. And if you do, you might pick up one of these little orange shovels. So ideally what you're gonna do is dig a little hole and poop in the hole and then cover it up. This is really ideal. What was that? You don't have to pack your own poop out. You can bury your poop. Yeah, so you could bring a little, I'm like talking about poop. You would bring like a wipe or toilet paper with you and put it in like a plastic bag, inside another plastic bag, inside another plastic bag, inside like a dark bag, right? So you can really like bury it so you don't see it like in your bag, but you want to bring it out with you. Oh, I didn't quite mean that yet, but that's okay. They're like, we're done hearing you talk about poop. Yeah, anyway, so don't throw your toilet paper on the ground. Pack it out is my basic gist. You can use leaves. I don't know what poison ivy is. So I've hiked 1,200 miles of the trail that's covered in poison ivy, and I don't know what it is. So I am afraid of using leaves because I'm like not 100% sure what I'm gonna be wiping my ass with. So I prefer the shake method. So when I pee, I make sure no one's around and I shake my ass for a while. That's how I manage my issues. Okay, personal preference. My husband's like, he always, yeah. Okay, so first aid kit, not 100% necessary to bring with you, but if your frontal lobe is developed, you probably want one with you. So this is just like basic supplies to keep you safe, Band-Aids if you get blisters. And then ours is pretty simple. We carry a tick remover. Ticks are not as much of a problem in the trail outside of summer, but they can be a problem and they're pretty terrifying. So tick remover gets them off. I think we've used it once. We carry Advil because muscles get tired and sore, and if I talk too much, my husband gets a headache. Just kidding, he's used to that. And indigestion stuff, like if you're caught on the trail with like bad gas or like something you ate is unpleasant, it'd be nice to fix that because you've like 6 miles till your car. So that's what we carry. This is a picture of the shelter on top of Blood Mountain. Blood Mountain is the highest part of the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. It's really the first mountain that hikers climb. And one of the things that made the Appalachian Trail unique when it was made, it was actually like a really hippy-dippy, like communal sort of vision that the founders had for it, where people would like roam throughout the woods and live in communes, basically, in the woods. And so about every 6 to 10 miles on the AT are shelters where people who are through hiking, like hiking the whole thing at one time, often sleep. They're often near water sources. This one is like mostly four-sided, like that. The door that the women are in doesn't have a door, it's just a doorway. But a lot of them are just 3-sided structures. A lot of community on the trail gets built around these shelters, so a lot of people will pause at the shelters to have lunch. If you're backpacking, you might sleep overnight there. They all have logbooks, so you can see all the people who have been around you and what they've been saying. So some people will say like, hey, we saw a bear here last night. Or like, in the summer, sometimes there's like rattlesnake sightings. That's much scarier than a bear. Or like at the top of Springer Mountain, there's a logbook that when people hike for the first time, they'll sign. So back in 2009, when we signed it, my thing was something like, here, who knows what this adventure will turn into? And then I dated it, 2009. And the Appalachian Trail Conservancy collects those books as they get filled. So there's like a record of the thru hikers use it to keep track of who's where, like who have they passed, who's behind them, how many days are they behind somebody, can they like catch up to that person. This woman in the doorway was doing the shake it off method, and my husband walked up on her one time when she was peeing. That's why we have a picture of her. It was pretty great. He was like telling us what happened, and we looked down, and she was telling her friend like what happened, and we realized like our groups were talking about each other at the same time, and it was really delightful. So, not a lot of privacy. So one of the big themes about the Appalachian Trail, I said it's for everybody. One of the mottos that you'll hear people use a lot is called hike your own hike. So if you're like a badass and you want to try to hike the trail in 50 days and beat the current record holder, great, go do it. Other people are like, hey, not for me. I want to take 6 months and I want to go slow and enjoy all the views. And other people like me are like, hey, I really like showers and I like my bed. So I'm going to do it in day hikes and I'm not going to backpack a lot. The whole point of the AT is that spirit of go out and see whatever part of this works for you at the speed you want or the way you want. Maybe you just want to see a couple miles in every state, or maybe you want to hike only in Georgia, or maybe whatever it is, like go at your own pace, do your own thing, is a really big theme. And of course, there's like ego people out there that are like, my hike's better than yours, but then you'll hear like somebody right behind them being like, hike your own hike. Like, it doesn't matter. Just a couple of like tips that we've picked up along the way. We like to have after shirts. So it's kind of humid in Georgia. It's humid in the mountains too. And so you stink a lot at the end of a hike. And we found that just packing a clean t-shirt and leaving it in the car made our lives a lot better. So as soon as we get to our car, we just throw off our sweaty shirt and put on a clean shirt. And we're like, oh, wow, this is really great. And I make the same recommendation to bring comfortable shoes with you. So even if you like the shoes you're wearing, they're gonna be sweaty by the end of an 8-mile hike. You're gonna be gross. So pack your Chacos, or, sorry, that's my uniform of choice, or your Crocs, or your flip-flops, your Tevas, or whatever it is that you really like, and change into those, and it makes your life a lot happier. Okay, so this is just how to keep up with us. Again, if you wanna see, this is these pictures really don't show up very well in the bright lights. This is Kelly and I when we reached the tree in the middle of the woods that is the boundary between Georgia and North Carolina. And if you can see, I'm still quite chubby then, so I made it 70 miles without losing a lot of weight. So just saying, you can do this too. These are the different ways that you can keep up with us. We adventure a lot, sometimes on the AT, sometimes in national parks across the country. Kelly now does photography full-time, so you can see some of his stuff. I manage my personal account, which is genuinely nerdy, but also our drive, hike, repeat account, which is hey, here's a fun hike, so-and-so, or wherever. So feel free to follow us, connect, or ask questions. Okay, that's it. Hit me up. People are murdered on the AT at a much lower rate than they're murdered in any actual living area. So people are murdered at a much higher rate in Athens than they are on the AT. People have been murdered on the trail. It does happen. But it's really rare. You're much more likely to be murdered right here, right now, than on the trail. Sorry, that was morbid. I have a problem with that. Also, you're really unlikely to be murdered by a bear. I know I mentioned a bear. Kelly and I have seen 64 bears in the wild on our hikes. The first time we saw a bear, I screamed and we ran away, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do. But the thing is, the bear was running away from us faster than we could run from it. So every bear we've seen has run away from us. None of them want anything to do with us. You see more bear butts than you see any other part of bears because they want to get the hell away from you. Yeah. Okay, Amanda? I don't have a trail name because Kelly and I are lame and private. So I was trying to pitch for a while that we should be John and Jane Doe because John Doe, Jane Doe, we would be murdered. He doesn't like that. So yeah, he has a sort of trail name of Gator Bait, which he picked up on the Altamaha River when he was seeing how close he could get to a gator. And unfortunately, the closest I come to is Puddles, which is because of falling in mud puddles, and Hunger Grumps. So those are the closest things we have to trail names. Christine? Okay.
What about taking your dog?
Oh yeah, the AT is really dog friendly for almost all of it. The only place you can't take your dog is in the Smokies. Which the Smokies National Park is dog-free. So people through hike with their dogs, and there's kennel systems where they'll board their dog while they hike through the park and then meet back up with it. You'll see dogs almost every time you're out. It's really up to you to know your dog and know what it needs. You really should keep your dog on a leash. Some people know their dogs don't need to be on a leash, but it's best to bring a dog. You can get really adorable dog backpacks, and they can carry a little bit of their own water and a little bit of their own food. Nothing makes our day more than when we come across a dog on the trail, because it's just we love dogs, but we don't have one, and so we it's a really fun moment.
So the majority of the people keep their dogs on leashes?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've seen a few people who don't, but for the most part, yeah. But if you're a dog owner, you want to know that dogs that your dog comes across are also on leash. Yeah. And if you have dogs, you're actually much less likely to see a bear because they hear and smell them more, and so they run away faster. Depends on the dog, yeah, and probably the murderer. Not gonna help, yeah.
Then the other question would be, so you always do day hikes, but then you're driving into Virginia, and you
Yeah.
hotel, and then you do a one-day, because all these drives
Are so far, yeah. So for a while, Kelly and I started doing overnights, where we would do just one night backpacking on the trail, and that was our preference. So we would connect a few of those parking lots together, and we would do 15 to 25 mile hikes. So we started the trail when I had a postdoc at UGA, so it was really close to Georgia, and then there was a year where I wasn't employed at UGA, I was actually employed at Duke, and so we lived in Durham, which brought us closer to the trail, so we sort of like worked our way up the trail. Then once we moved back down here, we started driving up for like 3 or 4 days at a time. So we would drive up, and sometimes we would camp, but like at a campground where we don't have to carry our tents with us. Sometimes we would get like an Airbnb. Airbnbs are super cheap in the middle of nowhere, so we'll get an Airbnb, and sometimes we'll like bring 2 cars or we'll rent a car. We've done that a couple times. My parents, we got into a thing where my parents would drive from Texas to wherever we were, and they were crazy and awesome and crazy. So they would like take us with our car to the end, and then they would drop us off at the beginning. But now that we've been hiking a lot more, we'll do like 15 to 20 mile days. So we used to do like 10 to 12 mile days, and then it slowly got longer and longer. And it's not always easy. We have to work our way back up to that, but that helps to cover more ground.
Now, another question. How do you keep track? So do you get like a badge for each?
I will make you a badge for every state you complete. So we buy maps because we're kind of neurotic and conscientious, like we like knowing that we're safe. So that's one really easy way to keep track, but there's actually several websites that will show you like it's this distance from this road crossing to that road crossing. We did most of it in order, not entirely, because there were some times where like we got rained out on one trip, and so we had a hole that then we just went back in and filled in. But for the most part, it was like we would start wherever we stopped.
Well, I know some of the trails in Europe, you get stamps.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, so there's nothing like that?
There is a passport, an Appalachian Trail passport that through hikers get that's just free, and it's various like hostels and restaurants and trail towns that you walk through, you can get stamps. So if that's your thing, you can get stamps. And there are badges if you do the whole thing. If you do all of the AT, you can like get a 2,000 miler badge. But you might need some more immediate reinforcement.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So you're not all the way only in the woods. So you do walk through civilization.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a city dweller, it's not going to feel like civilization. So, I mean, Athens is like a megalopolis compared to the places that we walk through. But there are towns that have small town grocery stores, so you can buy some food, or some towns that have tiny hotels. There's this awesome town in North Carolina that has a hot springs spa, so you can hike into the town and then get a natural soak in a hot tub. Yeah, see, you don't need a badge for that because that's awesome. Yeah, so there's like, it's been interesting because we're not really super small town people, but you see small town America in a way that you would never see if you're sticking to like bigger city places. And I mean, there's things about that we like, and there's things about that make me happy I don't live in a place like that, but it definitely makes me feel like I've seen a different part of the world. Yeah.
So you run across the last one now. So you meet a lot of people on the trails as you're walking?
Yeah, it depends on the year, like this time of year that you're out. So if you're out in the winter, you're not going to see very many people. I went hiking with a Mediocre lady last Saturday, and we saw probably like 20 or 30 people, but we were hiking south for the most part, and the through hikers right now are all starting in Georgia to try to make it to Maine before it snows. So there was a lot of people hiking north. So we were hiking in like different directions than people, but you don't typically see all the people that are hiking the same direction as you because you're all just kind of like moving along.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nat.
How many snakes have you seen?
We've seen, my husband almost stepped on a rattlesnake once. After that, we hiked 4 miles in 1 hour with full packs on. It was all downhill, but that's hard. It's like really freaking hard. So he was pretty terrified. He has a little problem with snakes. We also saw a snake once from really far away, and so it was across the trail. We could really see it. So we like backed off for a while. He got a little sick of waiting for it and threw a giant stick at it. That we were really far away, but I'm not sure we would repeat that experience. The snake didn't move. So it just took another like 30 minutes. So we just found a log further back and sat and had a snack break. It's not exactly a scenic overlook, but necessary. Have we seen any other ones? We've seen a sign. There's a handwritten note duct taped to a rock that said, "Watch out, rattlesnake at next corner." But we never saw that snake. We did see the sign. I think that's about it. We've seen like not rattlesnakes, but even not very many of them. More bears, but the bears have been not just on the AT. We only saw one bear on the AT in Georgia, and it was literally the last section.
What's your plan if like a bear comes at you?
So the out east, the only bears that we have are black bears, and so black bears are like they're really big scaredy cats. There's black bears and grizzly bears. So if a grizzly bear like out west attacks you, your best advice is to play dead, because you're not entertaining if you're dead. But for black bears, you can actually fight back, like hit and punch, and they're likely to run away from you. So you should, first of all, if you see a bear and it's not running away, you should take whatever little backpack you have and hold it up over you and look giant, because then they're like, oh shit, like that thing is huge, and they run away. Yeah, been there. So the idea is like throw your arms up, just like look tall. Like we've literally never had one that doesn't run away.
What was your scariest situation on the trail? With people?
One time my husband got a hitchhike ride from somebody who had PTSD and was literally crazy, and I was not on board. He was having bad sick issues, so he wanted to get off the trail, and I was like, this is not worth our life. And before I knew it, I was in back of somebody's convertible, and I was like, I'm not that kind of a psychologist, but I don't have to be to know this is not safe. About 5 miles later, we got out at a gas station, and we had to call several people. We didn't have cell phone service, so we used a payphone. And eventually we got a shuttle ride from somebody who had to drive so far it cost us $200 to get out of there. And he said it's worth every penny. He was pretty miserable. I'm in the Department of Psychology, but I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I'm not certified to diagnose anybody. So I actually study goals and self-control is what I study. So that's why I said, like, I'm a goals person. The second you told me it was a goal, I'm like, yeah, I got to try to do it.
My husband's top neuro.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't do neuro, but I know what that means. Yeah.
Do you hike alone, and if you carry anything for protection?
So there's lots of opinions about carrying things for protection. Bear spray is the equivalent of mace, and that's actually probably your best thing to have for protection from bear or from human, because it'll just deter enough people long enough. Some people carry weapons. I'm not a gun person. You can basically, like, every hiking argument ever starts with, should you carry a gun? There's a lot of different regulations if you're hiking the AT from state to state and from different national forest or national park area. So if you do want to carry a weapon, you have to really pay attention to what all those regulations are. I have not done much hiking on my own. Most of the time I'm with Kelly. I got to the point recently where I was like, I'm tough. Like, I can do this by myself. Yeah, sure, no problem. And I went for a hike by myself in the Smokies, and I did it. I did like 7 miles completely by myself. I saw like one person the whole day, but I was pretty freaked out being alone. So it was kind of surprising to be like, now I've hiked like thousands and thousands of miles, but being alone is still really different. There's a lot of people who do it. So I would say, like, start slow or small and just do a short section and see how you feel and get braver. You'll meet people along the way if you want to, but you don't have to if you don't want to.
How many hikes did you do during Step Challenge?
I did no hikes during the Step Challenge because too much time sitting in the car meant I could not walk, so I couldn't drive anywhere. So the last day of the Step Challenge, I walked 55.5 miles, so I could have hiked almost the entire distance of the Georgia Trail, and I really wish I had done something epic like that other than like walk circles around UGA's campus. But I couldn't take the 3-hour drive to drive there and back because Becca would have passed me. Yeah, I did 5 marathons in 3 days. And it was her fault. She said we should do the step off. That was not my idea. But goals, so, I have to try to win. Yeah, that's a different story for a different Met Talk, how she and I were that crazy. Okay, any other questions? Hit me up if you want to see adventures that we're doing or ask more questions. Thanks, y'all.